You know, running is an amazing way to stay fit, but it's got this strange paradox, right? It's incredible for our health, but at the same time, it comes with this really high risk of injury. So what's the deal? Why do so many of us runners get hurt? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dig into the data to find the real culprit. And the scale of this problem is kind of mind-blowing. Get this. Clinical research shows that up to 79% of recreational runners get a running-related injury every single year. Let that sink in. That's almost 4 out of every 5 runners getting sidelined. This isn't just a coincidence. It's a huge trend that tells us we need to look a lot closer at what's going on. And that brings us to a really critical point. If the injury rate is that high, maybe the problem isn't running itself. Maybe it's about the specific way our bodies are moving when we run, our biomechanics. It's a small shift in thinking, but it's a powerful one. It moves us from just blaming the sport to actually understanding our own movement. So, where do we start looking for answers? Well, even though a lot of runners feel pain in their knees or shins, a ton of evidence is pointing higher up the body, much higher. Turns out, for a lot of common running injuries, the root cause doesn't start where you feel the pain. It actually starts right here, at the hip. Okay, let's introduce the star of our show, the gluteus medius. It's this muscle on the side of your hip, and it has one absolutely crucial job: to keep your pelvis stable and level anytime you're on one leg. And what is running, really? It's just a series of one-legged hops over and over. So if this muscle is weak, it can't do its job, and that sets off a whole chain reaction of instability down your entire leg. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a nice theory, but is there any actual hard data to back it up? Can we physically measure a strength difference in this muscle between runners who are hurt and those who aren't? Well, let's take a look at the evidence. And the answer is a big, flashing yes. This table shows data from a study on runners who all had knee pain. The researchers measured the strength of their hip abductor muscles, that's our gluteus medius, on both their injured side and their uninjured side. And look at the results right here. The affected or injured side was significantly weaker. It averaged 21.03 units of strength compared to 23.26 on the healthy side. And that p-value of 0.031, that's the scientific proof that this difference isn't just a fluke. It's statistically significant.
So this weakness that we can literally measure translates directly into a flawed movement pattern when you run. When that gluteus medius isn't strong enough to hold your pelvis level, the opposite side of your hip actually drops down with every single step. This is what's known as pelvic drop, and it's a classic sign of hip instability that puts a ton of extra stress on your knee and ankle.
So how much does this pelvic drop actually mess with your knee? Well, the same study looked at exactly that. They measured how much the pelvis dropped and compared it to the patient's knee function score. That's the Kujalis score you see here. And the data shows a really clear link. For every bit the pelvis dropped, the knee function score went down by about 2.5 points. With a p-value of 0.010, that's a seriously strong connection. It's concrete proof. The more your hip is unstable, the worse your knee functions, period.
Okay, so we've identified the problem. Weak hips are leading to instability, which leads to pain. But the great news is, this is a problem we can fix. So let's shift gears and look at the evidence-based solution, starting with, you guessed it, targeted strengthening. And the science totally backs this up. Like this quote from a recent study says, strengthening the gluteus medius isn't just about making a muscle bigger. It's about improving your body's control and stability from the ground up. It directly tackles that root cause of instability we just uncovered. And the results you can get are pretty incredible. A major meta-analysis, that's a study of studies, compared 2 groups. One group only did knee exercises. The other did exercises for both the hip and the knee. Now, just look at this chart. The group that added the hip work saw a way bigger reduction in pain. The effect size here is negative 1.29. In clinical research, that is considered a large effect. It's proof that adding hip exercises isn't just a little better, it's way more effective.
We can even put a number on how quickly this works. In a 4-week randomized controlled trial, one group did gluteus medius strengthening exercises, while the other group just did stretching. The results are just wow. The strengthening group boosted their strength by an average of 17.32 newtons. The stretching group, they only went up by 1.91 newtons. That is more than a 9-fold difference. It just goes to show how quickly these muscles respond when you give them the right training.
But here's the thing. Strengthening is only one piece of the puzzle. To really make those changes stick and prevent future injuries, you also have to address the movement pattern itself. This is where gait retraining comes in. And the data here is so cool. It shows that tiny little adjustments to your form can have a huge impact. So one of the simplest and most effective ways to retrain your gait is to focus on your cadence. That's just a fancy word for your step rate, or how many steps you take per minute. The idea is pretty simple. Taking shorter, quicker steps can completely change the forces that are going through your body.
So researchers tested this. They just gave runners a metronome and told them to run in time with the beat, aiming for a slightly faster cadence. And on average, the runners were able to increase their natural step rate by about 8%. Now, 8% might not sound like much, but wait until you see the effect it has.
That little 8% increase in cadence led to this, an 18% reduction in vertical load rates. That's the speed at which the impact force travels up your leg every time your foot hits the ground. Cutting that number by almost a fifth is a massive win for preventing stress-related injuries.
And here's where it all comes full circle, back to the hip. The same study found that increasing cadence also led to a 14% reduction in peak hip adduction. That's that inward collapse of the knee we talked about, the one caused by weak hip muscles. So a simple tweak to your step rate can directly improve your hip stability while you run. It's incredible.
All right, so we've seen the evidence. Strengthening the hips works. Retraining your gait works. So how do we actually put this into practice? Let's turn all this science into a real, actionable plan. And let's start by choosing the right exercises, the ones that data proves are the most effective.
So to figure out which exercises are best, scientists use a technique called electromyography, or EMG, to measure how much a muscle is actually firing during an exercise. They then compare that to the muscle's maximum possible contraction, which is called MVIC. This gives us a simple percentage score, letting us objectively rank exercises from best to worst.
And when we look at the EMG data for the gluteus medius, the results are, well, they're pretty eye-opening. Take a look at this table. A simple move, the side-lying hip abduction, gets an incredible 81% MVIC activation. That's classified as excellent. The single leg squat is also really good at 64%. But here's the shocker. The traditional clamshell, probably one of the most common exercises you see for hip strength, activates the muscle at less than 40%. According to the data, it's a pretty poor choice for really targeting that muscle.
And that really brings us to the most important question this all raises, a question we should all ask ourselves. Is our training routine built on habit and what we've always done, or is it built on evidence? The science is pretty clear. A smart, data-driven approach that focuses on hip stability could be the key to running stronger, healthier, and finally injury-free.